Let me paint you a picture of corporate panic. It's late 2012, and somewhere in Auburn Hills, Michigan, Dodge engineers are sweating through their khakis. They've been secretly developing a supercharged monster they're calling the Hellcat, targeting around 600 horsepower. A respectable number, a number that would make them kings of the muscle car world. And then, Ford drops a bomb. 662 horsepower. 662. The most powerful production V8 in the world, SAE certified, sitting in a Mustang that costs $54,000. The Dodge engineers didn't just go back to the drawing board. They hid the new drawing board from their own bosses. Welcome to the story of the 2013 Ford Mustang Shelby GT500, the car that accidentally created the Hellcat. This isn't just another muscle car episode. This is corporate espionage. This is engineering warfare. This is what happens when Detroit decides that enough horsepower is a phrase for cowards. Here's what makes this story absolutely insane. In 2011, Dodge had a plan. A sensible plan. Build a supercharged Challenger with around 600 horsepower, crush the competition, go home early. But then Ford unveiled the GT500 at the LA Auto Show in November 2011, and everything changed. The man behind the Hellcat's engine, Chris Cowland, the director of SRT Powertrain, got one look at Ford's announcement and immediately asked his bosses for permission to target 675 horsepower instead. They said yes. But here's the plot twist. Cowland didn't tell them his actual target. He was secretly chasing 707. The dyno charts were hidden from everyone at FCA, except the small team developing the engine. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about this Ford, this mechanical middle finger to everyone who thought 600 horsepower was excessive. 662 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. 631 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. These weren't marketing numbers. These were SAE certified, verified by independent testing. Absolutely undeniable. Ford officially announced on April 26, 2012, that this was, and I quote, the most powerful series production V8 in the world. Not the most powerful Mustang, not the most powerful Ford, the most powerful production V8, period. The Corvette ZR1 had 638 horses. The Camaro ZL1 had 580. The SRT Viper had 640. Ford walked into the room and said, "Hold my supercharger." Let that satisfaction sink in for a moment. The engine, nicknamed Trinity by enthusiasts, was a 5.8-liter V8 with 32 valves and dual overhead cams. That's 354.6 cubic inches of American aggression force, fed by an Eaton TVS supercharger displacing 2.3 liters and running at about 14 psi of boost. But here's where Ford's engineering gets genuinely impressive. The aluminum block used something called plasma transferred wire arc coating on the cylinder walls, basically a coating thinner than a human hair that replaced traditional iron cylinder liners. This technology allowed Ford to bore out the engine from the previous 5.4 liters to 5.8, based on the previous 5.4 architecture. According to Ford engineer Chris Palazzolo, quote, using spray technology was the only way to get there. And because Ford engineers apparently wanted to give the competition nightmares, they essentially opened up the entire front end. The upper and lower grills were redesigned to directly expose the radiator and intercooler to the air, so open that owners had to install aftermarket mesh screens just to protect the radiator from road debris. Ford prioritized cooling over protection, because at 200 miles per hour, you'd rather have rock chips than an exploded engine. The result? 14% less drag and 66% more front-end downforce, dramatically more stable at high speed. Now, let's talk about performance. Motor Trend tested this thing and got 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Car and Driver confirmed 3.5. Motor Week confirmed 3.5. The quarter mile? 11.6 seconds at 125.7 miles per hour. For context, that's supercar territory. From a car you could buy at your local Ford dealer. But here's the number that really matters: 200 miles per hour. Ford's engineers had personally promised Carroll Shelby himself that they would deliver a 200-mile-per-hour Mustang. They tested it at the Nardo Ring in Italy, and they delivered. This was a Ford, a Mustang, A car your neighbor might own, cracking the 200-mile-per-hour barrier straight from the factory. And speaking of Carroll Shelby, this is where the story gets emotional. The GT500 was unveiled at the LA Auto Show in November 2011, and Carroll Shelby was there. He saw it. He blessed it. 6 months later, on May 10th, 2012, Carroll Shelby passed away at 89 years old. This GT500 was, as Consumer Guide beautifully put it, the last namesake car he personally blessed. I'll give you a moment with that one. If you're enjoying this story of Ford making Dodge executives lose sleep, hit that subscribe button. We've got more tales of Detroit insanity coming every week, and trust me, they only get crazier from here. Now, here's where we need to bait, as we say. Give Ford a little grief. Because with all this power, all this engineering brilliance, Ford decided to pair it with, wait for it, a solid rear axle. Yes, 662 horsepower, 200 miles per hour, and they're using suspension technology that dates back to the horse and buggy era. To be fair, they tried to modernize it. If you paid $34.95 extra for the SVT Performance package, you got Bilstein electronically adjustable dampers with normal and sport modes. But out back, Ford was still relying on a panhard bar. That's literally a single steel rod bolted diagonally from one side of the axle to the other side of the chassis. The same basic concept used since the 1890s. Every time this car hit a bump, that axle shifted slightly to one side. Enthusiasts spent $500 to $800 on aftermarket Watts links just to fix what Ford wouldn't. The S197 platform was the last Mustang generation to use a live axle rear. Ford basically said, "We're going to give you more power than a Ferrari Enzo. Good luck keeping it pointed straight when you hit a pothole at 150. But wait, it gets more intense. The GT500 came with only one transmission option, a Tremec TR6066 speed manual. No automatic. None. You want 662 horsepower? You're going to row your own gears, with a dual disc clutch that's 10 millimeters larger than before, and a reinforced clutch housing. This car demanded your full attention. Compare that to the Hellcat that came later, which offered an 8-speed automatic that let you sip coffee while launching to 60. The GT500 was old school, analog, demanding. It was a car that filtered out casual drivers by sheer physical effort. And because the driveshaft would literally disintegrate at 200 miles per hour if made from conventional materials, Ford used a one-piece carbon fiber unit. It was 14 pounds lighter than steel, reduced rotational inertia, and could handle the absolutely insane RPM required to hit those speeds. Let's talk money, because this is where Ford really twisted the knife. The base price was $54,200. That's it. For comparison, the Corvette ZR1, which had less power, started around $112,000. The GT500 gave you more horsepower, 200 mile per hour capability, for roughly half the price of its closest domestic competitor. And here's a fun fact that will make tax accountants cry with joy. The GT500 escaped the gas guzzler tax. Despite 662 horsepower, it achieved EPA ratings of 15 city, 24 highway, 18 combined. How? The sixth gear had a ratio of 0.5 to 1, combined with a 3.31 final drive, resulting in just 1,450 RPM at 70 miles per hour. Ford gamed the system, legally. The previous GT500s from 2007 to 2010, they paid between $1,000 and $1,300 in gas guzzler tax. Ford's engineers literally engineered their way out of a tax penalty while adding over 100 horsepower. Engineering genius or government loophole exploitation? I'll let you decide. Now let's put this in perspective against the car it accidentally created. The Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat. The GT500 had 662 horsepower. The Hellcat has 707. That's 45 more for Dodge. The GT500 made 631 pound-feet. The Hellcat makes 650. Another 19 for Dodge. But here's where it gets interesting. 0 to 60, the GT500 did it in 3.5 seconds. The Hellcat, 3.6. The Ford was actually quicker off the line, despite having less power, because it weighed roughly 500 to 600 pounds less. The GT500 tipped the scales at around 3,850 pounds. The Hellcat is closer to 4,450. And top speed? The GT500 hit around 202 miles per hour. The Hellcat, as we covered, hit an aerodynamic brick wall at 199. The Ford, the car that caused the Hellcat to exist, is actually faster in a straight line at maximum velocity. Ford built roughly 10,615 GT500s across the 2013 and 2014 model years, about 4,900 in 2013 and 5,730 in 2014. Not exactly rare, but not common either. These weren't special editions, but they weren't rolling off the line like base Mustang GTs. The reviews at the time were overwhelmingly positive. Motor Trend called it simply a much easier car to drive compared to its predecessor. Motor Week said it was, quote, one very special Mustang that every member of our staff would love to own. Even Motor Authority, who admitted they didn't come away wanting to buy one, was impressed by the sheer technical achievement. And let's talk about what this car looked like. Because Ford didn't just build a fast car, they built a statement. That heavily domed hood to clear the supercharger, those massive exposed front openings for cooling. The performance package brought staggered forged wheels, 19 inches up front and 20 in the rear, wrapped in Goodyear Eagle F1 supercharged G2 tires, Brembo 6-piston brakes with 15-inch front rotors. Inside, you got Recaro racing seats as an option, that cool cue ball shifter, metal rubber-studded pedals, and for the 20th anniversary of SVT, Special Vehicle Team, illuminated door sills. This wasn't just a muscle car, it was an event. The GT500 represents the absolute peak of the S197 platform, the maximum horsepower anyone could extract from a solid rear axle Mustang, before physics demanded independent rear suspension. It was Ford's final answer to a question nobody asked. How much power can we stuff into this chassis before it becomes genuinely irresponsible? And the answer, apparently, was 662 horsepower, 200 miles per hour, and a panhard bar that said, good luck and Godspeed. So what's the legacy? The GT500 didn't just embarrass the competition, it rewrote the rules of engagement. Dodge had to hide dyno charts from their own executives to respond. Chevrolet had to go back and rethink the Camaro. Ford, the company that gave us the Mustang II, proved they could still build absolute monsters when they wanted to. The 2013 GT500 wasn't just the most powerful production V8 in the world. It was a catalyst for the horsepower war that followed. Without this car, without Ford's audacity to put 662 horses in a $54,000 Mustang, we might never have gotten the 707 horsepower Hellcat. The GT500 is the reason American muscle cars are absolutely unhinged today. And that is the story of how Ford accidentally started a horsepower arms race by building a 200-mile-per-hour Mustang and daring anyone to do better. This is Car Chronicles, and if you want to know how Dodge responded with 707 horses of demonic fury, well, we just covered that. Check out the Hellcat episode in the cards above. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, would you take the analog brutality of the GT500? Or the automatic convenience of the Hellcat? I'll see you in the next one.